Hello, my name is Russell Virgin, and I am the Family and Community Services Director here at Mountain Land Head Start. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. I unfortunately have some other responsibilities that I have to attend to. But my role at Head Start is to direct all the services that we provide to parents and families who are enrolled in the program, as well as to direct the interactions that we have with outside agencies in our community. At Head Start, all staff are mandatory reporters of child abuse or suspected child abuse that we see while in the care or while caring for the children in the program. My role as the Family and Community Service Director is to take all the reports that you fill out and to turn those into the Division of Child and Family Services so that they can further investigate all our concerns. What we'll go through today are three different things. First of all, how do we identify suspected child abuse issues? Secondly, what do we do and what are the procedures to follow when we do have a suspicion of child abuse? And third, and probably most importantly, is how do we go about as an agency trying to prevent child abuse? First of all, let's talk about a couple statistics about our agency itself. Now, it's important to understand that when we make a report to the Division of Child and Family Services, that it does, first of all, does not mean that the child will be removed from the home. It does not mean that they'll even investigate. All it means is that we take the information and the facts that we receive and we observe and the information that the children convey to us, and we give that to the Division of Child and Family Services, and they decide based upon the validity of that information whether they're going to investigate or whether they're just going to document it and hold on to it for in case later information comes in. So do not be afraid or hesitant to report your suspicions. Last year, in fact, in the 2012-2013 school year, these are the number of reports that were made by our staff. There were 6 reports submitted of suspected sexual abuse, 9 of neglect, 20 of physical abuse, 2 of domestic violence, 2 of verbal and emotional abuse, and 4 child endangerment reports were submitted for a total of 43 reports that were made last year. Now that doesn't mean that 43 families were even investigated. That just means our staff had some concern that we reported to the Division of Child and Family Services. This means that chances are most staff will see something in their classroom that either throws off some red flags or concerns that they want to report. Therefore, we're going to go through exactly the procedures to follow to make that report. Now, we have to define what abuse is. Abuse, each state has a different definition of what they consider to be abuse. Here in the state of Utah, it is defined as non-accidental harm to a child, threatened harm to a child, or sexual abuse of a child. Those are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll dig into them a little bit more. The minimum criteria for making a referral, or referral as a report that we make to the Division of Child and Family Services. The minimum criteria is that the victim has to be under the age of 18, so we don't do any domestic violence concerns. We're strictly looking at the children we serve in the program as far as child abuse is concerned. So they have to be under the age of 18. We have to have a means of identifying and locating the victim. Luckily we have that. They're enrolled in the program. We know who they are, and we have that information. And then a specific new occurrence of abuse, neglect, or dependency. That new occurrence is important. Once a report has been made of a concern, we let that go. We let the Division of Child and Family Services investigate and keep that information. We don't keep reporting the same incidents over and over again. However, if a family we do have a concern with a family and later we have another concern and we see it or observe something else, we are absolutely expected to make that new report. But it's, again, a new occurrence of abuse. We don't keep bringing up past issues again because the Division of Child and Family Services already will have that information. So, signs of abuse. You should have a handout given to you that goes over the four different types of abuse: physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and emotional maltreatment. That go into these in a little more detail. But we're going to touch on each one. Now, it's important to understand that just because one of these signs are present in a child or a parent, it does not mean that that abuse of any kind is happening per se. most times when there is abuse occurring, there'll be several of these signs prevalent, or we can see these different signs in the children or in their parents. So, again, just one of these does not mean that there's some kind of abuse occurring. I'll give you a personal example. Well, let's go into the physical abuse one. Child has, now this is broken down into two different sections, the children and the parents. So we would want to consider the possibility of abuse when we see these signs in the children or these signs in the parent, because they're not going to just be reflected in one or the other, okay? But let me give you just an example to go with that about how just because there's one sign does not necessarily mean there's abuse, but we do want to be aware of all these signs. So, for example, that has unexplained burns, bites, bruises. I have a family member who was investigated by the Division of Child and Family Services because their child, he's absolutely wild and crazy and fun, but he is not afraid of anything. He was standing on a stool and fell back and hit his head on the tile floor. Now, at the time, they checked him for any signs of a concussion or concerns. I believe they even called the doctors to see if there's anything they should look for, and the child seemed fine. Within an hour, within a minute or two, he had stopped crying, he was fine, and he went on his way. However, the following week, while he was being babysat, the child bumped his head just slightly, and his head began to swell and fill with fluid. And it turned out that the week prior, when he fell off the stool, he had actually cracked his skull, but there were no signs of that. But due to the fact that they hadn't, that they didn't have observed and they didn't do an MRI or whatever, they actually reported it and they were investigated. Now, it turned out that everything was, they were able to explain everything and look everything, and everything turned out fine. However, just again, because we see one thing does not mean that there's necessarily abuse occurring. However, we do want to take the appropriate precautions to make sure that it is not abuse. We'd rather err on the side of reporting than not reporting. So, some of the other signs that we want to look for. Has faded marks after an absence. So if there's bruises that have kind of started to fade after a long break, we may want to consider that. When they seem frightened of their parents or other adults. When they shrink at the approach of other adults. Or they report injury by a parent. So sometimes you'll get disclosures from a child saying, hey, my mom or dad hit me last night, and here's why. But we also want to observe parents, because parents sometimes show signs as well of what's going on at home. If they offer conflicting or unconvincing stories about a child's injury, so if a child comes in with a broken bone and they keep changing their stories about how it occurred, that should throw off some red flags in our mind that, something may be happening here. Describes the child as evil or in any negative way. Uses harsh or physical discipline, or has a history of abuse as a child for the parent. Okay? Now let's look at some signs of neglect. Is frequently absent, and that, again, that could be a myriad of different reasons, but we do want to look at all of these different factors. Lacks needed medical care, so if they're not getting their immunizations, they're not taken to the doctor when they're sick, again, that can be for different reasons, but we do want to notice that. Is consistently dirty or has strong body odor, and indicative of not showering or cleaning or bathing or not washing their clothes. Okay? Lacks sufficient clothing, or states that there is no one at home to provide care. So again, any verbal disclosure of that we want to note. We want to look at the parent. If the parent appears indifferent to the child, or seems apathetic or depressed, and in these cases they may not intentionally be neglectful, but it may be their own emotional issues that may be causing them to neglect their children. When they behave irrationally or abuse alcohol or drugs. Again, abusing alcohol and drugs can cause people to get so involved in their own issues and their own needs that they neglect their children. But again, just because somebody is using alcohol does not mean that they're necessarily neglecting their child. Let's go. Sexual abuse. So, if the child is having, we may want to consider the possibility of sexual abuse if the child is having difficulty walking or sitting. They demonstrate bizarre, sophisticated, or unusual sexual knowledge. Now, it is normal developmentally for a child to show some interest in their parts or other parts, but we want to look for any unusual or sophisticated knowledge of more intimate sexual information, okay? Or they report sexual abuse by a parent or guardian. Now, for a parent, if they're unduly protective of the child, or limits contact with other children, especially those of the opposite sex. If they're secretive or isolated, or they describe marital problems involving power struggles or sexual relations. Now, emotional maltreatment. This is probably the most common thing that we see in our society, but extremes in behavior. So if the child is extremely passive or extremely aggressive, that may mean that they're emotionally maltreated at home. So there's also if they're inappropriately adult or infantile. So if you have a child who's acting like an adult inappropriately, you know, children often will tell each other what to do when they're playing. But if they're inappropriately adult in that instruction, then we want to notice that. Or infantile, they may, you know, be rocking and having trouble to self-soothe. Those may be indicators as well. As well as if they're delayed physically or in their emotional development, or reports a lack of attachment to parents. Now, we want to look at the parents as well. If the parent consistently blames, belittles, or berates the child, that may give us a clue as well. Or if they're unconcerned about the child and refuses to offer help with any of the children's problems. So if you come to the parents and with some concerns and they refuse to even to accept or to even consider help, then that may be an indicator. Or they overtly reject the child. They may blatantly reject the child. And so these, again, they usually come, when we see abuse, they usually come in groups. But we do want to notice all of these. And if you have red flags going up in your mind about some of these things, then you may want to look a little closer. Okay? Now, what do we do if we do have these concerns? What if you see some bruises on a child and the parent has conflicting stories about what happened? And you want to make a report to the Division of Child and Family Services? Well, the first thing you're going to do is to talk with your supervising teacher immediately or within 1 hour. Now, the reason we give you that hour time frame is it may not be appropriate to instantly go over and talk with the head teacher or supervising teacher about the situation. One, due to confidentiality issues. There may be other people present, there may be parent present that we don't want to be discussing these things around. And so we wait until the appropriate time, but we do need to be within an hour of the incident. So also, the last thing we want to do is make the child scared. So if they divulge something to you and you kind of get this look on your face and run over to the teacher, again, the children will start to clam up, they'll get afraid, and we don't want to make this a bigger deal than it is already for the children. So our goal is to notice the appropriate time to go over and discuss it with the teacher, okay, with the head supervising teacher. Next, I need to hear about it directly. Again, as the Family and Community Services Director, it's my responsibility to make all these reports to the Division of Child and Family Services, or DCFS. I'm just going to say DCFS from now on. So, immediately, this slide, pardon me, is actually about administrative staff. So if you're not a center staff, if you're not a teacher, assistant teacher, classroom aide, classroom bus aide, then you would report directly to me. You don't need to go to the supervising teacher. And that includes the family advocates who are out at the centers. The supervising teacher will then help the staff to fill out a suspected child abuse referral form. And I'll show you where to find that, okay? So if you go to our website, to the Mountain Land Head Start website, under Staff Login, it's kind of hard to see the little hand here. Staff Login, under Family Services Forms, pardon me, and click on that. Okay, our computer's being a little slow. Give it just a second, it's waiting to come up. Under that section, there'll be a section for child abuse. And we'll wait for it to come up. On our Mountain Land Head Start website, under the Staff Login section, right here, on the very end, if you click on Family Services Forms, it will bring you to the password protected page, which is the same password you use to get into the staff login area. So we'll pull that up. here under Family Services, I know you probably can't read it, there's a little section that says Child Abuse. And if you click on the Child Abuse, it'll bring up two forms here. The CPS and Law Enforcement Check-In form and the Suspected Child Abuse Referral form. You want to click on the Suspected Child Abuse Referral form and pull that up. Now, maybe I'll try and make this bigger so you can see it. It's a pretty simple page. It's just a one page to fill out. In the top section of the page, in this box, this is all the information that we need prior to making the report that tells us, more about the classroom, about the child themselves, so that we can identify who needs to be investigated. So, first, the victim's name, birth date, and primary language. And then we have questions about the child's class, classroom address, and class hours. And that's because DCFS or law enforcement officers may actually come to the classroom to investigate and to speak with the child. So they need to know when the child is in class. They need the parent and guardian's names, address, phone number, other children living in the home, because if it's abuse for one child, there's a good possibility that the other children are being abused as well. And so we want to make sure that we're taking care of all children. And this information is really important. Alleged perpetrator and their relationship to the victim, who the reporting staff member is that's filling this out, staff member's position, date, time, and location of the incident, if known, and the date of the report and the time of the report. So you'll fill all that out. If you don't know any of this information, you can talk to the family advocate or the teacher. This is all in Child Plus. And you'll just have to fill in some of the perpetrator information. Down below that, it asks for 3 different sets of information: physical indicators, verbal disclosures, or behavioral or emotional indicators. Now, think of it as if you were in a court of law. We don't want to put here emotional concerns that we have or feelings that we have. We want to put down the facts, the things that we've actually observed or heard from the child or the family. So, physical indicators, any bruises, bumps, marks that you see on the child, burns, you would want to write the concern in here. Any verbal disclosures, and if possible, we want it to be verbatim. We want it to be word for word what the child said. If not, give us the best that you have. And then the behavioral and emotional indicators down here. Now, when we have all 3, it really helps to strengthen the evidence that we have for the investigation. Now, we don't want, when I say that, I'm a little cautious to say that because I don't want you to feel like we're trying to attack or to find every problem we can in families. What we're trying to do is identify where real cases of abuse are occurring so that we can make sure that we're protecting children. And if there are some of these, we want as much information as possible to put into this. So if there is abuse occurring, then we can help protect the child. Okay. And then additional comments or relevant family background information, you can put that there, as well as in the back sheet. There's a bunch of lines you can fill in that area. And then you will sign it. And then I will fill out this portion here at the very bottom. Okay? So it's called the Suspected Child Abuse Referral Form that you will fill out. And so after talking with the teacher, together you'll fill this out quickly so that we're ready to make the report. And you'll call me and let me know that you're filling this out and what your concerns are. And then we'll talk about how I'm going to receive this report in order to call the Division of Child and Family Services. I can't make that call until I have the information necessary to give to them. So once you have filled this out, I need to receive that. Now, when we're talking about these reports, this is incredibly confidential information. We don't write any of these notes into Child Plus. We only fill it out on the form, and then we don't make copies of the form. All of those come to me and are secured in a locked location. And then at the end of the year, they're actually shredded once we've given the information to DCFS. So, immediately or as early as possible on the day that the incident occurs or that you receive the disclosure from the child, you need to contact me. Again, here's my contact information. I don't know if you can read that. It's on the directory. But also, I'll give you in your packet my card with my cell phone number on it. I almost always have my cell phone on me, and if you can't get a hold of me here at the office, try my cell phone. And the reason I say that is because the day may occur, there may be the day when you see something, you hear something, and it just doesn't sit quite right with you, but you don't make the report right away, and you get home, and you're like, man, I really should have made a report about that. Give me a call on my cell phone. I still can call DCFS and make the report. But just feel free to contact me. If for some reason I am not available, Patty Jonas, the Director of Child Development and Education, is the second person to contact. She as well can make those reports. Again, all of this is incredibly confidential. You don't speak about it, the concerns, to anyone who doesn't need to know, especially not parents or children, but even staff. You know, if they don't need to know, then we don't share that information with them. So maybe the teaching staff in the classroom, maybe the family advocate, because they go into the homes of the families and maybe may want to be aware of some of the issues. But again, it's really confidential. Therefore, you need to send the report to me either in a sealed, confidential envelope that is hand-delivered to me. You can personally deliver it, or you can either fax it or scan it and send it to me as well. Now, if you are going to fax it, please let me know so I can be by the fax machine and we're not just receiving this confidential information without anybody there to pick it up. If you do scan it, then I would expect that you delete the saved report on your computer and all that information, so it's not there. So we, again, only have the one hard copy that comes to me. Now, if you scan it or fax it, I do need to receive the original copy by the end of the week, and I will destroy the copied or faxed version. I will make a report the day I receive that referral report from you, and we'll get the ball rolling on the investigation if it needs to be investigated. Again, the original copy is only to be delivered to me by the end of the week in which the report was made. Okay, now, I don't know that I even really need to say this, but we're going to say it anyways. You do not need to call the family after you call DCFS and let them know that they're going to be investigated. Okay, once you've made the report, you're not there to tell the parents. You're not there to investigate yourself. So if a child starts talking about, hey, in the evenings my mom and her boyfriend, you know, they take off and I watch my little brother who's 2 while we watch SpongeBob, and they're gone. You don't sneak to their house that evening, peeking through the windows, trying to validate his report. We make the report to DCFS and we leave it at that. So you don't need to contact the parents, and you don't need to, nor do you have the authority or right to investigate. Okay, DCFS and other law enforcement officials have that responsibility and right. Okay, now, one thing that may happen is after we've made a report, they may want to come and speak with the child in the classroom. So you may have a DCFS worker or a law enforcement officer show up at your classroom saying, hey, I have been granted the authority to speak with this child and to investigate this case. If that happens, first thing to do is to identify the person who's coming into the classroom. They should either have a badge or an ID card. Now, most DCFS workers will have an ID badge or card with their ID number, and law enforcement officials will always have their information with them. If for some reason they don't show up with that identification, we can call DCFS to verify that they are supposed to be there investigating the child. Last thing we want to do, though, is to give someone access to that child who shouldn't have access to that child. So very first thing we do is to verify who they are. Now, we have another form if they come. So I'm going to show you where that form is at. Again, same place, right above the other form on the website. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. This is the CPS and law enforcement check-in form. Let me make it a little bigger. Your part and role on this form is very easy. You put in the date, time, classroom, and who the teacher is, and then you put in the actual ID number on their card or their badge. You put it right there, and then the teacher initials here that they actually verify that information. Following that, then the DCFS worker or law enforcement official will write down who they're authorized to talk to and interview, and then they'll put some of their the jurisdiction information and stuff like that down here. And below, they will put the determination upon completing the interview. Now, in cases where there's a real concern for the child's immediate safety, then they will check yes in this first area, okay? It's yes or no, but I have determined that for the child's protection, he or she will be taken into custody and placed in a temporary foster care and scheduled for a shelter hearing. Now that, again, is rare, but those are in cases where the child's safety is really concerned and they want to make sure that the child is safe from there on out. Most cases, they'll say the child will remain at school and can be allowed to return home after school, and they'll continue their investigation. And then the law enforcement or DCFS worker will assign that, and then the teacher will sign that as well. Again, this is also very confidential information, and so you don't make copies of this report. You just send the report to me. That doesn't have to be in the day that you fill it out. It just has to be in by the end of the week, in which the worker came in to discuss or to investigate and to have the interview with the child. Okay, moving on. Now, due to the confidential nature of this information, again, these interviews need to take place in a very private setting. So you wouldn't do this in the middle of the classroom. You would take them into one of the side offices, the Family Advocate office, or any of the other offices, and let the official speak with the child. Now, the child also may have the opportunity to have a support person present, and the worker may indicate that for this particular situation that they wouldn't have that, but it is a possibility to have a support person. And the role of that support person is there, again, as a support to the child. It's not to fill in the holes or the information that the child disclosed. It is purely there. The person is purely there to be supportive. Some of our children may have negative experiences with police officers before. We may have had children where domestic violence has occurred in the home, and all they know is that a police officer came in and dragged their parents away. Now, they don't see the correlation between the negative behavior happening and that they're trying to protect the child. All they see is that their parents were taken away by this person. And you have the opinion of those parents that is being conveyed to the child as well. So you may have, they may have a very negative opinion of the police officers. Therefore, it's really important to have someone present who they trust and feel that will support them. Okay? Now, it is perfectly appropriate to ask the interviewer if the child may have a support person. If they don't mention it or don't bring it up, please feel free to ask if it's okay to have a support person present. Okay? Here are the laws associated with reporting child abuse. Okay? Any person, official, or institution required to report a case of suspected child abuse or neglect, that is us, we are mandatory reporters, who willfully fails to do so is guilty of a Class B misdemeanor. Okay? In other words, anyone who knows about child abuse and doesn't report it when they're supposed to report it is guilty of a Class B misdemeanor and can be prosecuted. However, any person making a report in good faith is immune from liability, civil or criminal. So if you make a report in good faith trying to protect the child, you are immune from any liability. Whereas if you don't make the report, then there's a possible prosecution against you for not doing so. Therefore, we err on the side of reporting. Always feel free to contact me and discuss the issue or discuss your concerns. But 9 out of 10 cases, we're going to say, let's just fill out a report and give it to DCFS. They can do with the information as they please. In most cases where it is, we're not quite sure, they'll put the information on file and then they'll use that if anything else comes up. Okay? So, when in doubt, we report. Now, there is some concern when making these child abuse reports of how parents are going to react. We do have some systems in place to help protect you and our staff and our children. We have what's called the Zero Tolerance for Violence policy. This is in the initial application that the parents fill out upon doing their eligibility intake to get into the program. In essence, it says in Part A that they are told that we are reporters, mandatory reporters of any actual or suspected child abuse. So they're told here and at the home visit that the family advocates do with them that we are mandatory reporters. So they know that, okay? Or that at least they should know that. Part B says that any of the following acts may result in immediate termination from the Head Start. Possession of weapons, physical violence against another person and or property, verbal violence such as threatening, name-calling, or swearing. So if any of this occurs in the classroom, they are violating the Zero Tolerance for Violence policy, and they may be they may lose their enrollment in the Head Start program. Now, by signing and submitting the enrollment application, the parent is committing to abide by this policy and understands it. In cases where staff members feel that the parent has violated the policy, you need to contact your supervisor and myself immediately. First of all, we want to make sure that you're safe. So if they're getting a little carried away and emotional, we want to make sure that we get the people there to protect you and keep you safe. Your safety and the safety of our children is our #1 concern. So, if you're at all concerned about your own safety, contact me and your supervisor immediately. We will get the law enforcement officials there. We will come ourselves, and we will make sure that you are safe. That, again, I don't want you to be afraid, because that is a very rare occurrence. Our parents really want their children to be in the program. They know more or less what's appropriate to do in the classroom. And so that's a rare occurrence where your safety will be in harm. Okay, how do we help prevent child abuse? Now, you are, in your packet, will be given this. It's called the Protective Factors Framework. And this goes through different things that help. They did some research on the best families, and those families in preschool and child care where there was no abuse. Instead of looking at the problems, they looked at those who were successful. And they decided, what are the key factors that are making these families successful in avoiding abuse issues? So they came up with these protective factors, and there's 5 of them. Now, we'll just go through briefly. Again, they go through it in more detail on your worksheet, but I just wanted to touch on them. Parental resilience. So there's a lot that we do in the Head Start program to build up parental resilience. We help them to deal with their stress. We help them to learn social and emotional things in our visits with them to help them to build up that resilience. Okay. Social connections. We have all sorts of activities to invite the parents into the classroom, invite the parents to interact with each other so that they have connections in a support group. That's so important in high-stress parenting or high-stress situations, to make sure that they have social connections, an outlet to vent their concerns or to seek assistance and guidance. Okay? Concrete support in time of need. Now, I don't know anybody that would say parenting is easy. Now add to the parenting the fact that a lot of our families, the majority of our families are low-income families. They're below the federal poverty levels. So they're dealing with financial issues. They come with a myriad of other situational problems that increase stress and increase their need. Therefore, they need a support system. And concrete support. They really need to have someone that they can rely on and trust. Teachers, family advocates, that's what we're there for. But there's also a lot of community agencies that we work with to help provide that support to parents who are in need. Knowledge of parenting and child development, so we do that all year round. The family advocates work with the parents to increase their knowledge of their own development and the children's development, and as well, in the classroom, parents are invited to be present. They get to watch how you interact with their children and learn more about their children by watching the teachers. Social and emotional competence of children. So if we can increase the positive behavior in children and their emotional and social competence, then we can decrease some of the effects that it has on the parents. So these are, again, the worksheet that you have goes into it more in depth. I'd like you to look through it. Due to time, we won't have all the time to look at that right now. But these are definitely things that I'd like for you to look for and to think about as you're working. How can we build up parental resilience? How can we create social connections and concrete support in time of need? How can we increase the knowledge of parenting and child development and the social and emotional competence of children? If we can help prevent it, then we don't even need to have any reporting systems, and children would never have to go through some of the things that they unfortunately go through. It is really, I really feel that this information is really important for us. The children's safety is critical. We really care about these children and want to make sure that they're safe and protected. And these are the procedures that we can follow to make sure that to the best of our ability we keep these children safe and that we can do something about any abuse that is occurring. So keep your eyes open. If you ever have any concerns, feel free to call me. Again, my number is on the card that I provided to you. And again, just thank you for helping us to keep kids safe.